and I'm going to be speaking on two things about which I'm passionate. And one of them is citation, believe it or not. And the reason why I'm passionate about it is that something we don't always do well, and I mean we as in the people here at the seminary, or mainly just people as human beings, we don't always evaluate subjects fairly. We tend to look at people who agree with our side and listen to what they have to say and construct our arguments based on what they have to say and pretty much leave it at that. But that's not really a fair way to handle things. That's not a fair way to look at all of the evidence. So one thing I am passionate about is encouraging people to look at all the evidence that they can and come to a reasonable and reasoned conclusion based upon that evidence, rather than just confirming what they already believe to begin with. All right, so this is really about that. It's also about making sure that you cite correctly in your paper and don't get points off, but mainly about that first thing. So Dr. Beck asked me to include this picture on the front slide. The trouble with quotes on the internet is that you can never know if they're genuine. Abraham Lincoln. Now, it makes a serious point, right? It's a joke, but it makes a serious point. Don't trust anything on the internet unless you can verify it through reputable sources, usually in print, right? Or even e-copies of print books. But nothing like Wikipedia. Nobody here is going to use Wikipedia, right? All right, good.
Not your heads.
Yeah. All right, the basic rule of citation is this. You must cite any wording, argument, idea, or anything else that does not originate in your own mind. When in doubt, cite. It does not matter if you are not using the exact words of the author that you read. It doesn't matter if you think that you already knew it before you read it. Sometimes we get into a discussion about common knowledge. A general rule is, if you came across it in your research and constructing your paper, go ahead and count it as not common knowledge. We need to know where you got it from. And also as a general rule of citation, if you already knew something and you already saw something and thought that that was the way it was, and then you come across it in a commentary or something, it's helpful for you to cite it anyway because it bolsters your argument, right? Not only do I think this, but so-and-so thinks this, right? And so-and-so has a PhD, right? So that's helpful. Any questions about that? You'd be amazed at how many times we come across where people just say, well, I didn't know I needed to cite that. Well, you need to cite pretty much everything. All right, so just keep that in mind. So how do we cite? So the footnotes are the final element of the relevant structure. That means that they come last. All right, so we can see in these two examples. The first example, there's a paraphrase. So look all the way to the end of that sentence. We see that after the last word, after the period, there's a superscript 1. In the bottom example, that is a quotation, and we see after everything, after the period, after the quotation mark, there's the footnote. Does that make sense? It's a small point, but most people have trouble getting it just exactly right in the sentence. All right. Now, this is what your footnote is basically going to look like. Notice in this first note under footnote, you're going to have a tab there on that first line. The first line will be indented on every footnote. And notice the actual footnote number comes after that indentation. It's not right there on the line and then there's a tab. The footnote is indented. And then you're going to have the name of the author. And that's going to be first name first, last name last, just written out like normal. All right, now the title is going to be in italics. And you will have a page number. You'll always have a page number in the footnotes. If you don't have a page number, you haven't really cited. You haven't really shown me where it came from. We get papers where the whole way through, everything will be so carefully footnoted, and there won't be any page numbers. If you do that, then you haven't cited anything. Right, so make sure you have that page number so I can know where it came from. Now, your entry in the bibliography, a few things are switched around. Notice now you have the last name first. Last name, comma, first, middle. Notice that first comma is changed to a period, You still have the title in italics, and that which was in the parentheses are now enclosed in periods. Does that make sense? It switches up a little bit, but it's just it makes the information easily accessible to the reader. Now, if you have a question, see Turabian. Who has this book? Everybody has this book, right? So this has everything in it. When I took this course, I didn't get this book. I thought I could just get the information online. Once I got this book, I realized how wrong I was because the information you find online is either wrong or incomplete. This has almost every example I could possibly think of in it. And more importantly, and more to the point, this is what I'm looking at when I'm looking to see if you've cited correctly. So this is very helpful.
I have a question.
All right, so commentaries are a special case. They're a special case because they're very confusing. Part of the problem is that most people who cite commentaries academically aren't using Turabian. They're using SBL, which actually Turabian directs you to SBL. But here we are citing based on the Turabian model, which can be very difficult. Now what I've wanted to do is include a nice handy list of all the common commentaries in Turabian format for you to use so that you can check yourself against it, because there's several different formats you have to use. Well, there's a problem with that. Every one I found is different. These are lists produced by universities and seminaries, and they can't get their act together as to how exactly you're supposed to cite particular commentaries according to Turabian. So I recognize that it can be difficult. And I'm not particularly interested in making sure that you've got just everything just exactly perfectly. It's important that you cite things properly, but the most important elements that you're going to have are these here in that second point. You have to cite by author. I would say most papers we get have at least one of their sources cited by editor and not by author. That's incorrect. You need to have the author who actually wrote the words that you're citing. Does that make sense? This is especially going to come into play in commentary sets. You need the title of the commentary, and I don't mean the commentary series, although that's important. You need the title of the particular book that you're citing, not just the series. But that's the next element. You also need the series. You need both. You need the city and publisher and the date of publication. For this class, you must include both the date your edition was published and the original date of the publication. This especially, you'll run into this if you're using Logos, right? It'll give you an automatic citation, and that automatic citation gives you the Logos copyright date and doesn't give you the original publication date. So by the mere fact of you looking up original publication date, you're going to be able to see whether the source you're using is out of date or not. Because you can't cite Matthew Henry and give a date of 2006, which happens all the time, right? So he's too old for you to use, and you'll know that if you look up the publication date. Does everything on this make sense? As an example, if you're using the Expositor's Bible Commentary, the Revised Edition, because that's the one you need to be using, I don't want to see a citation that says, footnote, Temper Longman, Expositor's Bible Commentary. That's wrong. You've not given me any of the information I need, right? That's the editor and the series. So we need the author and the title of the commentary and the series and all of that. Are we good on that? Good. All right. So a paraphrase. A paraphrase and a summary are basically the same thing. Summaries are longer, so we can use the same information for both. A paraphrase communicates the source's idea within the context of your own work, sentence structure, and words. A proper paraphrase must be different from the source in structure of argument, structure of paragraph, structure of sentence, and wording. So you're taking the idea as it exists in your source and you're appropriating it into your own work. Does that make sense? You're not simply rearranging the words and plugging it in. You're taking the idea and you're usually commenting on it in some way, evaluating it, and that can be as simple as, so-and-so makes a helpful argument here, and then you paraphrase what he said. So here's some examples. Let's say the source says, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, right? The first example I give, the swift hazel vixen leaps above the deadbeat pup. Is that a proper paraphrase? No, it's not. Even though every word is different, that's not a proper paraphrase. Why? The same sentence structure, same everything. All I've done is replace words with synonyms. From words, you can right-click and look at the thesaurus. So that happens all the time. People have clearly just gone through, copied and pasted, and replaced words with words from the thesaurus. That's not paraphrasing. That's plagiarism. The second example. The lazy dog is jumped by the swift fox. That's actually an okay paraphrase. Some of the words are the same, right? But what's wrong with it? You're just presenting it in a vacuum, right? It's just you're taking it, you've rearranged the words, you've changed some of the words, but you're presenting it in a vacuum. That's not a paraphrase either. So a right paraphrase would be what's on bottom, right? For Lee at least, indolence and dogs goes hand in hand with their being jumped by foxes, their swifter cousins, right? So you don't have to say it like that, right? I'm being sort of light right here. But you've appropriated the idea into your own work. You're commenting on it. And even though you're using some of the same words, because you have to, right? You don't have to scrounge in a thesaurus to find a synonym, say, for authorship, if you're talking about Pauline authorship of Ephesians. You don't have to do that. You're going to use some of the same words, but you're clearly presenting it within the context of your own work. Does that make sense? Are we good on that? Any questions? All right. Quotation. When using the exact words of your source, you must place them within quotation marks and properly cite the source. You must place them within quotation marks and properly cite the source. We get a lot of papers with one or the other, but missing both elements together. That's incorrect. Even if you have the whole thing in quotation marks, it's still plagiarism if you don't say where it came from. And even if you have a footnote telling me exactly where it came from, it's still plagiarism if you're using the wording of your source. Why is that? Because you're presenting it as your words, and it's not, right? It's somebody else's words that you're using. So you need to put it in quotation marks. So only use a quote if you must use the exact words of your source. More often than not, you should not use quotations. You don't need to use quotations. You should use paraphrases, summaries, adopt their ideas into your own. But if what's being said is very important to what you're saying and you need that exact wording, then you can use a quote. For instance, if you're providing a definition of something, it's okay to use a quote there. But never use a standalone quotation. Don't just copy and paste something into your paper and let it speak for yourself. Even with quotes, you need to incorporate it into your own work. Everybody knows about block quote format, and everybody usually tries to do it, but most people have trouble with the formatting. So guess what tells you how to format a block quote? Turabian. So look at it. It's helpful, and we'll hit you on that. If you have something in your text that's say 7 lines of quotation, you're going to be hit on that for improper formatting. It's also confusing. Have you ever read a book where it's just line after line of quote, and then you just sort of forget whether there's a quote going on or not? It happens all the time. It's very confusing. So it's helpful to us if you put it off in block quotes, if it's 5 lines or longer. If you use your source's wording without quotes, it is plagiarism. It's not a mistake. It's not being careless. It's plagiarism. It's wrong. So you need to take care that when you're using the exact words, you use quotation marks. Any questions on quotation?